otherwise. Great.
All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I am elated to welcome our speaker, Dr. Ben Shapiro, and welcome all of you, members of the larger Minnesota Twin Cities community, including my colleagues at the Science Museum of Minnesota, and my U of M colleagues from the Learning Informatics Lab, Curriculum and Instruction, Educational Psychology, and all sorts of other programs around campus. This is one of the first speaker events we're jointly hosting across the Science Museum of Minnesota and UMM's Learning Informatics Lab. And Dr. Shapiro's work is really what makes that possible. In the museum field, there's a vested interest in creating engaging and educational experiences. To do so, the visitor studies field has focused on how visitor groups learn together, specifically revealing the interconnected influence of a museum's spatial and physical design with visitors' social, temporal, and emotional experiences. However, these lines of data have tended to be studied in isolation. About 2 years ago, a few of my colleagues and I became aware of Dr. Shapiro's research through his 2017 article, Developing and Using Interaction Geography in a Museum. This work really embraces the complexity of these interactions, bringing multiple lenses on museum experience into an accessible visualization. I know my museum colleagues and I are so excited to learn more about these tools and think about how we might use them in our current and future work. And I personally am so excited just to learn more today. I'm going to pass this back over to David to hear more about Dr. Shapiro's work.
Thank you, Megan. Hi, everyone. I am David De Lima, an assistant professor in UMN's Department of Educational Psychology. I first want to thank Megan for those inspiring words and connections. Since this is our first jointly hosted speaker event, I wanted to take a moment to briefly introduce the Learning Informatics Lab. The LIL was established in 2019 as an interdisciplinary intellectual space where we research, design, and mobilize information technology and data analytics to improve learning across the lifespan. We aspire to build relationships with several units and faculty across campus and beyond, and identify common problems and contexts for conducting our work. I will include the lab website if Bodong hasn't already, and our contact information in the chat. And you can find more information there. And if you have similar interests, please reach out to us to connect. For today, I'd like to warmly welcome Dr. Ben Shapiro, an assistant professor in the Department of Learning Sciences at Georgia State University. Dr. Shapiro's work, I'm taking this from your website, Ben, which beautifully summarized your work, leverages learners' relationships to data to support learning, promotes pathways to data literacy and engagement with civic data, supports teaching, technology ethics, and specifically data ethics, and advances teachers' reflective professional practice to interpret data about classroom interaction. What is so powerful about Dr. Shapiro's work is his approach to integrating data analytics with the micro details of social interaction. The approach is granular at once with sizable data and small data. And in addition, Dr. Shapiro creates resources for our academic and practice-based community. We're here today and we'll hear about a suite of those tools, but I also want to note an additional resource. It's an absolute treasure trove for researchers interested in discourse and interaction analysis. It's called the Learning How to Look and Listen website. I'll share that link in a moment. Ben was pivotal in creating it. And Dr. Shapiro, I have learned so much from you as a colleague, and I'm just so grateful that we found this window to hear about your work today. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you. And everyone, please join me in welcoming Dr. Shapiro.
Y'all are so nice. It's so good to meet you all. And it's like really just wonderful to meet all of you and learn about everything that's going on out in Minnesota. So I just really appreciate being here. I'll just kind of hop right into it. Let me see. We tested all this stuff, so hopefully nothing goes wrong. I'll be demoing quite a bit today. I'll try to make it kind of tight, nice, and give us like at least 20, 30 minutes at the end to chat. Hopefully no technical issues. So I'll just kind of like hop into it. Let me see here. David, give me a nod. You see my screen and everything? Sound good? Okay, great. So Yeah, so title of this talk, kind of speaking both to all sorts of different audiences here, but just expanding interaction geography and museum studies. I'm over at Georgia State University. I like kind of just starting, I like when anyone starts like this, but just giving a little bit of background about me, the people and places who have really been informative on who I am, and certainly many folks here that I continue to work with. I cross, and a lot of these people cross a lot of different disciplines. I generally kind of identify with learning sciences, information visualization, computer science. I love teaching. I love working with teachers, and I love working with other people. So just kind of giving a feel of who I am. One person I really did want to point out a little bit is this last photo here is a wonderful new PhD student, Sierra Gilliam, over at Georgia State. And I'll be sharing some of the things she's been working on to scale some of the methods that I'll share today. She's wonderful. So I just, wanted to highlight her recent efforts. Today's very much, it's a very methods focused talk. I'm going to focus on demonstrating new open source tools to transcribe and dynamically visualize people's interaction that kind of comprise a methodological approach I've been calling interaction geography with other folks. And I'm really just going to focus on the value of this method for museum studies, though there may be applications, of course, to other settings as well. So I'm going to begin by highlighting some common methods, just a high-level overview of common methods to study visitor interaction museum. I'm then going to kind of demonstrate interaction geography as a complementary approach to these existing methods, particularly because it provides a more integrative way to work across these existing methods. And I'm going to show interaction geography and how it relies on two tools. One, a transcription tool, a Mondrian transcription software, and the second, a dynamic visualization tool that I call the Interaction Geography Slicer, or IGS. And then I'm going to illustrate some recent efforts to scale these tools from one particular museum to other types of settings, museums and classrooms and schools. And I'll just conclude by highlighting a few things, questions about learning, and also the ethical use of data relevant to many fields, but really come out through this work. So, again, I hope this is generally interesting to many different types of audiences who seem to all be here. So super quick, I'm just going to review 4 perspectives that kind of are used to study visitor interaction in museums. The first one may not be talked all that much, but it's so important, it's so critical. It's methods that look at what types of interactions physical spaces even can afford. So this is, and by that I mean, this is a set of drawings by an architect named John Paponis of the High Museum of Art out here in Atlanta. And what they're all showing is different visibility possibilities within spaces, different types of interactions that might even be possible in this floor plan of the second floor at this museum. So for instance, the image F, the bottom right there, the top of that image is showing the sight lines that someone can have when they stand at that single point there. And the point of that is, well, what visitors or visiting museums can even see from a point on a floor plan tells you a lot about the types of interactions that might even be possible in that space. So again, one perspective is really coming from the discipline of architecture. How do we look at spaces and say what types of interactions for visitors might even be possible? Another perspective, Beverly Sorrell's work around tracking studies to me epitomizes this. Any museum educator, been around for years. I mean, God, I could probably go back to the 70s, maybe even before. Folks on this call will know. But I just pulled 2 of her graphics here. The top left one is just a bar chart from 1997. And all it's showing is the time spent from different groups of visitors in one particular exhibition. So the top left bar in it shows that it looks like 9 visitors spent about 1 to 5 minutes in this particular exhibition. And the far right bar shows that, hey, 2 people spent about 65 to 70 minutes in one exhibition. That's from 1997. The bottom right is a meta scattergram from some of Beverly's recent work. I won't read it. The point is she's advanced, as well as a lot of other people, efforts to do these types of tracking studies. And the point of them is how long someone or a group stands at an exhibit, a gallery, an entire floor, is actually an important way to think about things like visitor engagement, interaction, and even learning in museums. So another type of perspective there. Third perspective looks at talk in a lot of detail, particularly while people are at exhibits. So the top left image here, labeled 1, is from Von Len and Christian Heath's early work, 2001. And it's just kind of looking down at a group of folks, group of visitors at a science exhibit, and it's showing the positioning of their bodies. And these authors were really interested in what people said as they moved about just at a single exhibit. The image labeled number 2 over here kind of shows a cartoon graphic from some of Rolf Steyer's work. And it's showing kind of one type of approach of many to look at the details of what people say while standing at exhibits. And this is used for all sorts of things. Of course, how parents structure children's conversation while at exhibits. This is a critical method to see some of those things. So again, talk at exhibits, and here a different way to look at it. The final drawing here, labeled number 3, is from a wonderful professor named Jessica Roberts. And what she's doing is super interesting here is she's looking at different qualities of talk in an original design exhibit, and then a redesign of that exhibit titled Big Questions, and then another exhibit titled Timelines. And what she's doing is she's comparing changes in interpretive talk, question asking talk, types that she's coding as reading, and curiosity driven talk. So a totally different way to look at talk at exhibits. That's kind of a third perspective. Final perspective, I mean, you could almost frame this as like a learning analytics perspective, a computational computer science perspective, but it's very common to see, this is actually a whole interface, the top left image here from someone named Joel Lanier. And he's showing a floor plan of a gallery space and one visitor moving as a green path across that entire kind of floor plan. That bottom right is just a different type of visualization of visitors in that same type of exhibit. The point here is a lot of the type of learning analytics, visualization, computational work we're seeing in museums does things like this, looks like this, kind of a fourth perspective on how to look at visitor interaction. So with all that said, each of these kind of perspectives is super valuable. But what each of these approaches or perspectives achieve in granularity of description, I would argue they tend to lose in synthesis or integration. And put that simply, we have methods that look at space, we have methods that look at conversation at exhibits, and then we have methods that look at movement across gallery spaces, across museum floors. But we have really few methods to kind of look at those things simultaneously and work across those perspectives. So that's the focus of this talk, the methods interaction geography. Before I kind of dive in and demonstrate this method, really just as another complementary perspective to all the existing approaches in museums and other settings, I did want to say a little bit about the background of interaction geography. It blends a geographical perspective made famous in the 70s called time geography from Torsten Hagerstrand's work, really looking at movement outdoors, and there's all sorts of things to talk about there. But interaction geography blends that early work with a lot of contemporary work in the learning sciences, and also a ton of new possibilities with visualization programming languages that are very recent, I would argue. Interaction geography uses 2 tools. One is a visualization tool I've been calling the interaction geography slicer. And the second, I think, is equally important for certain types of things, is a transcription tool, a way to transcribe movement from video data. So the rest of this talk, I'm really just going to focus on demonstrating these tools and talking about how they allow us to see interaction in hopefully some really new and worthwhile ways. I'm going to illustrate, start with the IGS, the visualization tool, and I'm going to use a single case from a museum. I'm going to introduce the people in that case, a particular family, on the next slide. After I go through that visualization tool, I'm going to illustrate the transcription tool, the Mondrian transcription tool, and how to use it to transcribe movement data from video. And then I'm going to discuss a few efforts to scale this approach to other museums and schools. So I just wanted to start. I think it's super important to look at the people, certainly behind any data. A lot of this data that I'll share today is collected very much with people, and I'll talk about some of those participatory design methods that are ingrained with some of the things I'll share today. But this is a 1-minute video. It's going to introduce a family entering a gallery space. I call this family the Bluegrass family. It's actually 4 different videos worn by each visitor on a camera. So it may look confusing for a second, but what you're doing is going to watch a family approach one exhibit, and you're going to gain a little sense of who they are and some of the things they're talking about. So just a little setup video.
This is interesting right here. Yeah, this is cool right here. These instruments are pretty amazing.
Yeah, Joe.
It has kind of stretches like yours.
Yeah, right. By the big garden.
Like one his mom did right there.
I doubt it.
David keeps mentioning.
Look at this. This is the coolest guitar. Unless
Yeah, so again, that's the bluegrass family. 5 folks in that family. One of them, a 6-year-old boy named Blake, who you'll meet a little bit more in a second. And they're obviously in a museum that's focused on music, specifically early country bluegrass music in this particular gallery space. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to boot up this visualization tool called the IGS. So let me click this link. And we're going to look at that interaction, their entire interaction in that gallery space over approximately about 9 minutes. So when I click that link, this just takes you to a page on my site where you can launch the actual tool. Eventually, I'll move this off my site, but I just wanted to point out that on this page, there's instructional videos and other things about how to format your data. I'll touch on some of these things today, but this provides more detail if it's of interest after the talk. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this tool here. And I'm going to make my screen bigger here. Let me make sure there. Okay, perfect. Actually, let me make that. Let me move it. Give me just a second. I just got to move some annoying Zoom things around. Okay, let me put this guy over here. Okay, David, give me a nod. You can see my screen fine. Everything's good. Great. Okay, so this is the interface for the tool here. I'll unfold aspects of this interface as we go through it. So I'm just going to get rid of this how to use our kind of intro screen. And if you click this bar, you can load example data ranging from Michael Jordan's last shot in the NBA Finals, museum gallery visits, classroom science data, science lesson data. But I'm going to hit this load data tab because that's a particularly exciting one. You can load your own data into this tool, of course. And I'm going to hit load files here. And let me just back up right here. What I have here, this is a folder of data from that family in that gallery space. So I'm going to kind of unfold and talk about some of this data. I'll talk about formatting it, what that looks like later in this talk. I'm going to click a file that says floorplan.png, so an image file of a floor plan, and I'm going to click open. And what we see in the tool now is we see that floor plan tilted in 3D perspective, so we're looking at it in 3D. This is where that family entered the museum gallery. That's where they entered on the video. And that's that first exhibit they stopped at on Hank Williams, kind of a famous musician, of course, right? So I hope that roughly situates everyone. Of course, there's 5 more exhibits along this kind of semicircle set of exhibits. This here is like a bunch of technology screens. You can sit down and watch and interact with different things about the exhibit right here. On this wall over here, it's a giant wall of records. And on this wall is a bunch of other exhibits about a famous female country singer named Crystal Gale. So point that out. You can load floor plans in this tool, of course, and that just situates a little bit from that video we watched. This is a floor plan of that gallery space. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to load one family member's movement into this tool, their physical movement across this gallery space. And I'm going to begin with someone named Adir. Okay, Adir is 25 years old. And when I press open here, we're going to see Adir's movement across this floor plan and also upwards in time. And I'm going to explain how to read that because that upwards in time is a bit of a new view. All right, so let me hit open. So we see Adir's movement as a purple path. We most likely all of us know how to read the floor plan view. We kind of see Adir entering here, moving across, moving back. What's going on here in this second path is Adir's movement is being extended upwards in time. And to help read that, I'm going to go down to this button down here, this animate button, if you all see that. And I'm going to hit start in just a second. And we're going to see Adir's movement being animated. And I'm going to talk about it to help read these views. So here we go. Adir enter the gallery space. The straight line extending upward, that's really fat, it's thick, Adir's not moving, right? So when someone doesn't move, the line just goes up straight. When he moves, you can kind of see another long pause here, another pause over there, and now he's about to walk quickly back across the gallery spaces. So really for, first kind of thing, it's just important to gain a little bit of familiarity with reading these types of visualizations. They're quite new. There's a timeline at the bottom here, and hopefully you can start to see, hey, yeah, okay, Adir enters, stands, wow, for what looks like almost 5 minutes, right? So that's a long period of standing, right? Okay, just a second. Yeah, perfect. Okay, I just froze. Everyone You see me all right? Great. Okay, just froze for a second. Yeah, always love running these tools on a Zoom session. Fantastic. So he stands there for about 5 minutes, moves across a little, starting to move across these 6 exhibits, stands for another period of time, little pause there, longer pause there, and of course, walks back across the gallery space. So other things you can do to help read this view, you can rotate the floor plan. All I'm doing is rotating the floor plan, right? Kind of gives you different views on this 3-dimensional space-time cube structure is the terminology behind it. Let me rotate it back to where we were. You can flip it into 2 dimensions and let me hit 2D here. This view becomes much more useful when you have more people shown, but I want to introduce it now because it becomes important later to the talk. The 2-dimension view, we have the same floor plan. We're looking down on it. We can see a deer's movement on the floor plan a little bit more precisely now, right? We're kind of up closer to it. And we can see, these little circles where he stops, right, as well. So we can read the floor plan better in the 2D view. The right view is also a similar type. It's a flattened version of what we saw in the 3D view with the time view. And by that, I mean up and down in this view on the timeline is up and down on the floor plan. So when I hover across the time view, right, you can see how the 2 little big old circles, the bugs, so to speak, are synced, right? And the value of this 2D view is that it provides a very analytical way to carefully make selections from time. And it just provides a different view on interaction, which I hope later you'll see the value of as we go through it, right? You can, of course, rescale time in lots of different ways here. Okay, there's all sorts of things to unpack. You can pick a minute and focus on it. But for now, I'm just focusing on one person's movement, introducing these 2D and 3D views. I'm going to flip it back into 3D, right? You get kind of a nice little animation there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to load Blake's movement. And again, Blake and Adir and the rest of his family, 5-member family, are visiting this gallery space together. Blake is a 6-year-old boy. And of course, if you haven't seen this work before, you can guess, well, what's a 6-year-old boy going to look like versus, a 25-year-old man here, right? Probably going to be really different. Yes, there's going to be lots of fun stuff to talk about. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to import Blake, and then I'm going to animate, and we'll talk a little bit about what's going on, right? So here we go. Blake is the orange path. I'm going to go down to my animate button, and I'm going to hit start again, right? So Blake and Adir enter the gallery space together, go to the first exhibit. While Adir is standing, Blake is really quickly moving across the rest of the gallery space, right? He's sprinting at those points, right? If you're seeing a line that's going that fast, shoots off over there, right? Comes back to Adir. And it looks like now they're moving together, kind of branches off a little bit. Blake takes off to the technology screens, comes back, joins Adir, and then they kind of move off at the gallery space together. So I hope it's obvious. One thing is like, wow, paths can look really different, and they can tell you a lot of really interesting things. Also, floor plan views have existed for years. Space-time views are a totally new thing at this scale. They're much more revealing, I would argue, about how visitors would interact in museums. Of course, having both the floor plan and the time view together is valuable, right? Also, a common thing, when you show folks who are not in museums this, is like, oh, wow, 6-year-old boy running all over the place. He can't possibly be engaging and learning. He can't, he's being deviant, right? No, just some folks would say there's nothing wrong with that. What is actually going on is Blake is doing a lot of amazing things, I would argue. One of the things he's doing is he's running back and forth between family members. He's been to this gallery space before, and he's really upset that Adir is standing in like reverence at the Hank Williams exhibit. He's upset because Blake wants to show him the rest of this gallery space, because these people who are featured in these exhibits are like this family's heroes. Because this family is all musicians, and these are all the people they want to grow up to be like, right? Now, you can't tell that from this, right? I don't think you could do that at all from this. But how did I reach those conclusions? One of the ways, I'm going to load files here. I'm going to go back to my data, and you can import video into this tool, right? So I'm going to import a video from Blake's perspective. This is the camera that he was wearing during this, right? It gets imported here. You can grab and move that video around if you want. But the powerful thing here is where you can hover across the timeline, select things from the visualization, and play that video at that point. One thing that stands out to me is when Blake is running a lot back and forth here, but here, they're very much together. And one of the early insights from this tool is, well, I started looking at what happens there, and it was a way to discover that, hey, here comes Blake. He run backs over. I don't know if you can hear the video too well here.
Right here.
Whoa.
And he's now leading a deer on a tour of Leicester Flats, Maybelle Carter, and a few other famous magicians, right? So the point I'm making there is by having the video in here alongside the visualization, you can do different types of analysis and lead to more meaningful conclusions than if you had one or the other alone. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to get rid of the video. And I'm going to unfold a couple other possibilities that helped me make interpretive analysis of this family early on a few years ago. I'm going to put it into 2D again, right? So same kind of 2D view. You know, again, now we don't just have a deer's path, we have Blake's path, right? Again, the 2D view provides kind of a different type of analytical way to look at this data. But what I'm going to do now, I'm going to load another file. And this file is titled Conversation. And you can guess what's coming through a conversation file. This is a conversation transcript. And when I hit open, two things are going to happen. First off, if you see along each path, a deer and Blake's path, there's now rectangles, right? And if I hover over these rectangles, they're actually turns of talk. So what's happened is you've imported a conversation transcript with turns of talk in it, and it lines them up in space and in time within this tool so you can look at movement and conversation together over space and time, right? And if you hover over these turns, of course, you can read the talk, which is wonderful. You could play the video, of course, if you wanted as well. The second thing that happened is the paths and the talk, everything changed colors, right? And I just want to point out, you've got two movement paths brought in. A deer is orange now, and Blake is blue. But in that transcript, you had 5 speakers. So all the tool did was it changed the colors to line up speaker and path, if that roughly makes sense. Okay, that's why the color changed. You can do other things with the talk that hopefully are really powerful. First, you can align it at the top. And that's kind of a nice view. It takes it off the paths. The reason why is you can like really, well, where are the gaps in talk? A deer and Blake are not talking here, right, for long periods, not talking here for long periods, those types of things. You can really quickly compare the lengths of each turn of talk, and that could be very meaningful for different things. And you can do all sorts of other things like this. Right now, I'm going to search in this little search bar down here. I'm going to type a question mark, and I'm going to hit enter, and you can guess hopefully what that's going to do. I just search for when does a deer or Blake ask a question. And it looks like Blake doesn't ask a single question and a deer asks 2 questions. Looks like one's here. Which one? Right? And that's not old. That's not that old as another question, right? So you can search the transcript, of course, for keywords, just kind of basic search functionality there. You can, you know, if I remove a deer's path, right, we can clearly see that Blake is, you know, not talking if we just wanted, not asking a question if we wanted to double check that. Let me get rid of the question mark, put that back in. So you get the idea. We're looking at 2 visitors visiting the space at the same time, movement and talk over space and time. We've seen how we can bring in video data. I'm now going to flip everything back into 3D, all right? So same thing, we have Blake and a deer's movement. Talk is now aligned kind of vertically in time and also along the floor plan as well. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put in the rest of the family. Jeans is Blake's brother. He's 13 years old. Lily is their sister, about 23 years old, and May is their mother. All right. So 3 more people in this family. Let me hit open. We now have 5 visitors. All their movement, all their talk is shown. Let me put the video back in just for kicks. There it is. And I'm just going to animate the whole family in this gallery space. And, you know, the major point here is I think what we're doing right now is like an interaction geography analysis. For example, you know, as we're seeing these unique paths unfold in time, you know, we can really compare and contrast differences and why those might be important. Other things like when those little dots come together, a concept that we've been using is like, that's an engagement contour. When you get these clusters of people coming together, intensive engagement around a visit, and then a release, they go elsewhere, right? Path-based metaphors and engagement contours, this language, I think, comprises ways to kind of do this type of interaction geography analysis, right? While this is going on, you can do all sorts of things. Say I only wanted to select when people are stopped, when these visitors are stopped, right? I can hit stopped, and it only shows the stops, right? You can do moving, of course, right? And it only shows where they're moving. You do all sorts of things that, you know, we could add more that folks want in the future, of course, but these are ways to selectively make units of analysis are really interesting, hopefully, in this tool for particular things. And the last thing, you know, I think for me, you know, with Blake as an analogy here, the idea that visitors can curate their own, visitors as curators, and the ways that visitors curate their experiences through their movement is something that's very visible with an approach like this. And hopefully there's a new perspective for museum studies there that could be really valuable, just highlighting how this approach might be valuable to bring new ideas to museum studies. However, hopefully it's obvious this type of approach can do the same things that museum studies practitioners and researchers have been doing for many years. So it can ask the same questions, such as parents structuring children's conversation through question asking. But now you can kind of search that across different exhibits and see how it repeats at the same exhibits. So hope that roughly, I hope I didn't move too fast there. The last thing I'll point out with this visualization tool, and I'll move on. If I clear the data, you can, of course, load from example data. You can load your other data. I just thought I'd load a classroom science lesson here, right? Same thing, totally different context. We now have movement from a teacher, talk from a teacher and her students. And, we can animate that. This is a 56-minute classroom science lesson, and we're now seeing a teacher's moving over space and over time. We have the video, of course. In the talk, I could get rid of the teacher talk to just look at student talk as it's elapsing over time. And we can do lots of other things. So I won't get into much of that, but the point there is, hey, you can bring in, of course, lots of data from other different contexts. So I'm going to close this down. I'm going to close this tool, close that link. We go back to the presentation here. A few seconds. So summary, hopefully I've just provided a little taste of interaction geography as an integrative perspective to study visitor interaction. We can look at space, movement, and conversation together. I hope I've kind of started to show a little bit, hey, there might be some discovery of new concepts. I was mentioning engagement contours, the idea of visitor or personal curation, path-based metaphors, how we might describe these paths that support studying new phenomena like repeated engagements. And, as I was mentioning for museum studies, hopefully it's somewhat obvious that it's like, hey, this could support existing theoretical perspectives, such as parent-child conversations around exhibits, and possibly some new ones, such as I was mentioning visitors as curators. One thing that became very obvious for me and others using these types of tools is when you start seeing young kids running around a museum, very quickly you can see they're doing it for all sorts of intentional reasons. And many of us who probably work in museums understand that, but the idea of how children might use their families as resources for learning is a really different perspective on children's learning. And we just haven't had methods, I would argue, to really look at that too deeply, perhaps. All that to say, so that was a visualization tool. That's kind of, I think, in some sense, critical to using interaction geography as an analytic method. But there's huge questions on well, how do you collect data, right? And so part of that leads into this other tool, Mondrian transcription software, as I'll demonstrate in just a moment. But I wanted to say a few things first. The IGS is designed to work with manual or automated data collection. So on one hand, everything I just showed, as learning analytics, as computer science, as all these technologies we use are advancing quickly, that can all be automated. And there's some huge ethical questions and also some obviously lots of other questions to consider in that space. But right now, just making the point that a lot of that data collection can be automated. However, I would argue there's enormous value, first off, in qualitative movement transcription. If you've done any qualitative work with conversation data, sure, we can automate a lot of that now, but there's still, yes, it can be tedious, but no, it's not really tedious, because if you hand transcribe things, you can learn about participants, you can build relations with people, you can see things that if you just automate the whole thing, you can't see. So there is value to qualitative transcription work generally, specifically movement transcription. But I'd also say, I'm not sure if there is a tool to do it. If someone knows of one, please share. I'm about to demonstrate one. We have lots of tools to transcribe conversation. We have really few tools to qualitatively transcribe movement. And the last thing I'll say is, yes, we can automate a lot of the data collection things. But if you start working with this data, as I'm sure many learning analytics folks have, and many people on this call may have, sometimes they're incredible when the setting is beautifully set up and it's not complex like a classroom or museum. But once you get, multiple people running around an exhibit space, your precision is gone. And so, there is this precision question with automation currently. And also kind of I mean, I've seen a lot of different sensor-based systems. I'm sure a lot of folks on the call have. The best ones I've seen are pretty mediocre. And they're also really, really expensive. You know, I don't think an average museum is going to spend, or a classroom, it's not, a teacher's not going to spend $2 million for an elaborate sensor setup. Sure, there are some amazing ones for a couple $100, and it would be really cool to think about with folks on this call how that might be leveraged for some of this work. But I just wanted to point out trade-offs between automation and manual means, and it leads into why build a manual transcription software for movement. So I'm going to show you a type of software to do that. Same kind of thing. You click the link, currently go to my page. You can launch the tool. You can read instructional videos and learn a little bit about kind of the data outputs from this tool. But I'm going to launch the tool. I'm going to do the same thing as I did for the visualization tool. Kind of similar type of interface. Hang on, let me refresh there. Let me get rid of the how to use message again. And this time I'm going to load a floor plan of, let me back up. This is one that Megan had sent me of the Science Museum out in Minnesota. This is the Cardboard City floor plan. I don't know much about this. It's like an amazing floor plan. Let me, but you can see I can load a floor plan image into this tool, right? This is a transcription tool. I can rescale the image if I need to, right? You get a little feel for the Discovery Hall, the layout for Cardboard City as it's titled, right? All sorts of exhibits. I've never been there. It looks like fantastic. Now, if you were working in this space and you had collected video from any angle, from anywhere in this space, you could import one of those videos now into this tool. I don't have any video like that. So right now, I'm just going to import a blank video, okay? And it will just give you an idea of how to use this tool. So I hit open and you just get a blank screen. And you can see a time, 0 minutes and 0 seconds at the top left of that screen. So you have a video file, a floor plan image file. And what this tool allows you to do is it allows you to trace fine-grained movement of objects, of people, of whatever from that video onto this floor plan, and behind the scenes, it is rectifying your tracing to the actual image size of that floor plan. That was kind of a semi-technical way to describe what I'll just show in a second, okay? So here's where you enter the space, it looks like. When I press my mouse, the video is gonna start. So imagine I'm watching this video and I could see somebody I want to trace their movement, right? When I click, the video is going to start, time is going to start going in the video, and wherever I move my mouse is going to draw a line. So here we go. And there's no sound on the video, just so you can hear me. So if you look at that time in the top of the video, we're at 4 seconds, 5 seconds, maybe they walk by the welcome booth and they go over here. And when I click again, I can stop. Now, when I move my mouse, nothing happens. I can move around the screen. You get a big red dot to indicate where your previous little line segment ended, right? 11 seconds passed, right? So let's say, I don't know, let's say this is an adult, right? A parent of some kind. And let's say I'll start up, I'll click again, they walk over here. Now say they're going to stand here for 3 minutes. Rather than like waiting for 3 minutes here, if I press F on my keyboard, it'll jump in 5-second increments. So I'm just pressing F a lot of times. And if you look at the time in the top left of that video, it's now at 2 minutes, 30 seconds, right? Okay. Say they move over here a little bit again. Say I want to rewind, I made a mistake. I can rewind that and it will stop, right? You can fast forward and you can rewind in this tool. That provides ways to more efficiently and quickly transcribe movement data. So those are simple features that for qualitative researchers are hopefully super, super useful. If you make a mistake, you can erase it and then redo it, right? Let's say this parent stands for another long period of time over there. Let's say they walk around over here, they go over here, and maybe they just walk right back from where they came in very quickly over here, okay? Something like this. And then they leave, and I'll stop there. So it looks like they were in there 3 minutes, 28 seconds, right? If I hit Save Path, it'll download a transcript of that data, and we'll look at that in a second. Or actually, I'll just show you what that looks like real quick right now. So I'm gonna double click that. It's gonna open up the transcript. And give me just a second. It's probably gonna start Excel. Yeah, great. No rush, but I think it's important to kind of see the data file that's generated from that. And then I'll draw another path, and then we'll stick them in the IGS so you get a feel for it. Oh, there we go. Okay, so this is the data file that's generated. You get a time column, right? Very precise time values, and an X and Y position pixel positions that are precise to the original image size of your floor plan, okay? So let me go back to the tool. That was an adult. Let's draw a 6-year-old girl or a 4-year-old girl. Let's draw a young child, right? Say she enters over here. She's not going to stop. Let's say she goes over here. runs over here. Maybe she stops for a bit. I'll hit fast forward a few times there. Sprints over here, goes over here. And again, I'd be watching video. I'd be trying to follow her on the video while I'm tracing this path. Let's say she runs, I don't know, maybe circles around here. Okay. And of course, there could be some real intentionality behind these movements. I'm just kind of hypothetically very quickly doing this. And let's say she leaves in 50 seconds, right? I hit save path again. Okay. Now we get another transcript file. If I go back to the IGS, 2 seconds here. Boot up the IGS, let me make that bigger. Seconds. I'm going to go to the load data button. I'm going to load that cardboard city floor plan, the same floor plan, the exact same one I've been using in the Mondrian tool, of course. I'm going to hit open. Right now we have that floor plan in 3D, just like we looked at way back with Blake and Adir and the Bluegrass family. And this time, instead of loading the Bluegrass family data, I'm going to go down to my downloads folder, and I'm going to grab, looks like, which one do I want? These ones. Okay, these were the 2 transcripts I just did, I believe. And there we go, right? Purple path was the adult in there for approximately 4 minutes, and the orange path was the young child. And of course, the difference is no surprise or astounding. You can kind of flip it into 2D and do the same types of things. This was a super quick demo just to show you how the Mondrian tool works and how you can really quickly sketch something up in there and put it into the IGS, of course. If you had a conversation transcript, you could put that. Of course, I could get the blank video file and put that in as well, right? But if you had the original video file, you could go in there, load it, and it would display in the IGS. You could move it about, resize it, do all sorts of things. So I hope that made sense, how you have a qualitative transcription tool. The last thing I'll say about that transcription tool is I think there's like a practice to using it. With any tool, there's some type of practice, but when you first transcribe conversation, there's a practice to that certainly as well. The more you use the transcription tool, put simply, it's not just the faster you get, the more detailed and more interesting types of movement you can draw, if that makes sense. So I think there's a practice around qualitatively transcribing movement that's important to talk about if you're going to be using that tool. So shut down the tools here, close that all back, close this site, close the file. Let me go back to presentation here. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, I've shown kind of detailed little case studies of this type of work, and I just wanted to give a glimpse of some of the work to scale these methods, right? The first image is an older image, but I think it makes the point of how this might be scaled in museums. Each column in this figure is a family from the museum I had been working with, similar to the Bluegrass family. The Bluegrass family is actually shown in that first column. Then we have a family I called the Women in Music family, a family I was calling the Business Partners, and a family for actually great reasons that wanted to be called the Taylor Swift family. Each row is a gallery space, right? The Taylor Swift family did not visit the Rotunda gallery space, the third row. So I've just put a floor plan of the whole museum and shown all the movement, just so you can get a feel for how these gallery spaces are connected. But all this image, all I'm using this to show here is the comparative possibilities when you look at different families, different people in different types of gallery spaces. When you produce images like this, you can quickly compare and contrast family movement, individual movement, and we're only looking at movement. You can do the same thing with conversation. And you can imagine, wow, if I could click video and watch video at different types, different families, that might be super, super revealing. So again, as you scale this type of approach, one way to do it in museums would be, I think, things like this, where you create these types of comparative graphics to support the questions you're asking in those types of things. This is a different graphic. This is from some of Sierra Gilliam's work, who I'd mentioned at the beginning, wonderful PhD student down at Georgia State. And what she's been doing is she's been looking at teacher movement in different classrooms. So what we're seeing here is six different classrooms collected from all across the world. The data is from the TIMSS 1999 video study. So older data, super famous, interesting study for different types of reasons. And what she's done is she's transcribed a single teacher's movement in each of these very different types of classrooms. And she's, of course, showing just their movement here over space and over time, just as we looked at it in the IGS earlier. The one thing I'll note is color here. Codes, basically purple is like lecture and orange is like group work. That makes sense, hopefully, roughly. So case 3, the teacher is, there's only lecture going on. So all those movement patterns you're seeing are related to how that teacher is using their movement to lecture. Some of these other cases, case 6, for instance, there is hardly any type of lecturing going on. It's all interactive group work, group work monitoring that teachers, of course, is central to kind of teaching practice. So one thing that jumps out from this image, hopefully, is like, well, when you can code these paths, which you can do in the IGS, you can code data in all sorts of different ways. You can start to not only just kind of develop units of analysis, but comparative types of graphics that allow you to ask questions about different phenomena. So for Sierra, differences in how teachers monitor versus lecture is like super relevant and interesting to her work. So kind of just 2 little graphics to kind of highlight some ways to scale these types of this type of work and questions and those types of things. Limitations, next steps, new questions. I feel like I could spend a whole talk on this, and I put it on one slide. And I think I've just glanced at the time. I probably went a little fast, so maybe I should just slow down here a little bit. But I think there's, again, I think a whole talk could be said on things from some of this slide here. So first off, interaction geography, as I see it's like an exploratory visualization approach. There's like inherent limitations with any exploratory visualization approach. So for instance, I and we and the folks I've worked with have not put anything like prediction into these tools, right? And that would be a really different route. It's possible. We haven't done that we've reasons for not doing that. But the larger point there is there are strengths and weaknesses with any kind of exploratory visualization approach. And interaction geography, I think, just will have some of those inherent limitations beyond just like conventions. Like there may be better or worse ways to show movement paths in certain ways. That stuff's kind of easier to address and change in these tools. But when you're talking about exploratory visualization, it's different than some of the other techniques that, for instance, a lot of learning analytics folks might be using to make prediction or those types of things. So I just think it's really important to state that. I think this work generally raises a ton of new ethical questions and considerations. And so I just thought I'd share a couple of things that I see really critical. I think it's really critical to use these methods to develop relations with people and participants before and while using the approaches. I mean, a lot of stuff we're doing in museums and classrooms and other settings, they actually can become a really powerful way to build relations with people. If you imagine people drawing and creating their own movement and talking about it with them, it can be a very empowering thing for people. But it contrasts a little bit with just kind of dropping in video in a space and automating everything, right? There has to be we should talk about how do you develop relations with people before just dropping an approach like this in a space, right? And very related to that, but different in some sense. This approach was both developed with a museum, and I think in a really participatory design way. The museum was super, super traditional, so lots to talk about there. This was a really new thing. But whenever we've been using this approach, one of the most obvious findings is when you do it in close collaboration with practitioners who know and work in museum spaces, in classrooms. First off, they can read their spaces and understand them at a far greater level of detail than anyone not working in those spaces. And it becomes really meaningful to work together. So again, I think a huge part about this is when you empower practitioners to use approaches like this, of course, the work is a lot better, becomes a lot more meaningful, and it almost to me feels critical to doing this type of work. Connected to that, I mean, you can say it differently, like who uses this approach really matters. Sierra and other folks we are starting to work with, imagine using this work to look at like teachers' racial noticing in classrooms, right? Really different type of set of questions and those types of things. One of the things that I think is important to highlight, of course, with any method is like what you bring, the questions you bring, of course, and your perspective and your experiences on the world really matter for how you might use this approach. And for this approach, it just hasn't been used that much. So I don't think we know the answers to that as we do with some other types of methods that have been around for a long time. Data ethics generally, issues of privacy, identity, and by that I mean, well, representing people as paths. There's things to talk about there and what that means. The way I frame it, I think throughout this work, both when it was originally developed and certainly now, we're in close conversation with our IRB, with lots of other folks, because a lot of this work pushes some of these conversations around data ethics and asks questions that sometimes really are just beginning to be asked. So the way I look at it, before you start any project using methods like this, and of course, throughout the project, you need to constantly be asking these questions around how are you ethically using data? What considerations have you given to privacy, user identity, learners, and those types of things? And plenty more to talk about there. I know folks on this call are really experienced with those types of things, but just fronting that throughout the process of using this method, conversations around data ethics are just, they need to occur all the time. So with all that said, generally, I think hopefully this approach raises new ways to consider phenomena such as engagement or learning across scales. And if you look at a museum, the idea that you could go from an exhibit to a gallery space to a complete museum visit and quickly go back and forth, jump into conversation and exhibit, zoom out and see kind of movement across an entire gallery floor or a complete museum visit. Hopefully that's really valuable to ask questions about engagement and learning in places like museums. I hit on it a little bit in the talk, hopefully, but the idea that you can create new units of analysis with these tools is exciting. It's important. For instance, in classroom work, a ton of units of analysis and research has been given to looking at talk over time. The idea that you could analyze talk in space and time and clump talk in spatial units of analysis is a really, really different type of thing, but something that's really, it's kind of the focus of these types of tools, right? So the idea that we could do new units of analysis there hopefully is exciting. Let me see, my lovely Zoom thing is blocking my third point. Let me just, yes, now I got it, okay. Just a second here. And yeah, hopefully I hit on it a little bit, but how you blend qualitative and more computational work, hopefully that came out across in this talk. I mean, I care a lot about that, but generally I think one line there is, how do you blend manual and automated data collection tools? And how can they play off each other to mutually inform the development of computational tools generally? Because I think a lot of behind this work was really respecting manual forms of data collection, but of course, recognizing the power of automated techniques, visualization programming languages, and just kind of computational methods generally. So yeah, that's all I got. So thank you and questions. I hope that was coherent enough. And I figured I'd just kind of keep it tight in case there's questions here to discussions to be had. Yeah. I can stop sharing here. Okay.
Ben, thank you so much. What a rich, expansive talk, and really like grounding us in how to use these tools. Thank you. We have time to spend together now and have a discussion about the work. Then there are a few questions in the chat. If you would like to respond to those, or if anyone who dropped a question in the chat would like to unmute themselves and ask, we can do that as well. So why don't we start there, and then we'll open it up to the room for questions and a broader discussion.
All right.
Yeah, I have a burning though little question, and it's, where does the word Mondrian come from? Alice suggested it might be the artist, but I'm curious kind of what's the choice behind that word.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, so this is definitely connected to Mondrian the artist. I think when we made these things originally, when I was working on it a few years ago, yeah, it looked like a Mondrian painting. The other connection there is, I don't know if folks will know this person, but there's an architect named Bernard Tschumi, and he made something called the Manhattan Transcripts, which were super famous kind of hypothetical architectural drawings, and they had a lot of influence about looking at space and time in architecture. So Mondrian Transcripts puts those things together conceptually. Yeah, so definitely connected to Mondrian. Yep. It's fun. That's a fun question. That's cool. Yeah.
I have a question. I'm really curious about the possibilities for further roll-ups. And I'm speaking here absolutely as an applied researcher. You know, I'm at the museum, my research happens at the museum.
Yeah.
The idea that a child is going to be running back and forth and still learning is so familiar to museum people. Yeah. And, you know, is part of our DNA of how we understand the place. But the question that I would get, I'm imagining the exhibit developers that I work with, would be something like, where are the children running back and forth more, and where are they running back and forth less? And where is that tied to, because within a museum, that is both a learning opportunity and maybe it's a moment of distraction. Both of those are possible. We have people on the call here who work on the museum floor and are going to know exactly what that looks like instinctively. But if we wanted to turn that into a broad summary that I could then bring back to an exhibit developer. So I'm wondering about sort of bigger roll-ups that you might be able to do with this data, especially for someone who's maybe not going to learn the full details of the visualization as you just described it here. And if I say, well, just look at Ben's chart, it's a little too much. So I'm curious about roll-ups.
Yeah, I think I heard that perfectly. It's like super interesting question. Two answers to that. So first off, think of everything I shared today. First off, it's all free and open source, so anyone can go look at it, right? That's part of it. So please, like, and part of that is like, these are like the simplest working tools on the web, right? That's where they're at right now. We have like tons and tons of features that we'd like to build in for specific reasons. And the hope would be that other people have similar types of features. One of them is like, wouldn't it be great to have like an export data sheet button or export argument or export whatever, and do the roll up exactly like you're explaining. So one thing with this tool is you can think of it as it organizes data in a way that you could export it to say things, make arguments for the use of interaction over space and time. And so I think developing more standard graphics that you could just export and use to make an argument would be like, I think that's like, as I heard it, is that one good answer to kind of the roll-up question there? That's what you mean by it, right? I think that's great. It's not there yet. We need it. The only other response I had to your question too, I wouldn't say I've worked in the museums that I've worked, one in particular, it was neat to use these tools because it was a way that was two very traditional museums I had been working with. And it was a very wonderful way for the educators in that museum to be more empowered to make arguments for the educational mission of the institution to exhibit designers and architects who often cared, of course, about really different questions. So one thing there is like, tools that just empower certain folks in museums to be able to do things that they'd like to do. And then of course, support richer conversations. So I think there's just something in there about when you bring in tools like this, to empower certain folks and have more collaborative conversations rather than falling into kind of like what each division wants to do, their perspective on the museum or something. But yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I see there are a few questions from Alice in the chat. Alice, do you want to ask those questions?
Sure. Hi. Yes, I had a question about which cameras were used. But then actually just to follow up on what you just said too, I was thinking, in what ways did you feel that the educators needed to advocate for them? Was it a disconnect between what they valued and what other departments in the museum valued, or was it maybe a lack of experience in the way that those different departments kind of use the museum? And sort of educators, right, we have the time to spend with our participants and our visitors, and we know that running back and forth happens, and that can be a joyful experience, just like Marjorie was saying. And sometimes I guess speaking for myself, sometimes think that's a shared assumption, and then I go to a meeting and people are like, people are running, and I'm like, that's fine. And so it is more of a, not values maybe so much as a understanding of how the museum is used. So I guess I just wanted to hear a little bit more about what they felt they needed to be empowered to do. And then my like nuts and bolts question was around what type of video and stuff.
So yeah, no, that's really cool. So my short answer would be, in the museums I work, the education teams often had to, and I think this is true, not all, certainly not all museums, but the education teams I worked with, it's like the architects built the space, the exhibit designers built all the exhibits, and then the education team was like, oh, go fit your whole curriculum and program and everything you want education-wise to that, right? And so in kind of a really glaring example, we brought these tools before they were building a gallery space with architects and the education team. And the architects, like all they cared about, of course, and for good reason, is like they wanted to provide beautiful views of the space, right? these kind of vistas, viewpoints of different parts of the gallery space, and certainly reference some tracking study like stuff. And so the education team demonstrated this, and the architects were kind of just like, wow, never thought about this before. They went back to their drawing and came back with just subtly different drawings that were supporting different types of circulation patterns. So that to me was kind of the best example from some of this work, where the education team was like, hey, like, listen to us before you build the space. So that's how I think about that, right? And I know that's really challenging. From what I understand in other museums, that's very much not the case, right? It's a much more collaborative, it can be a much more collaborative atmosphere when the educational mission is really respected at the same level. And then, yeah, shoot on anything with those video cameras. I didn't, was there a technical question there? Or
I was wondering with the, were you using GoPros? They were wearing GoPros in the museum, the country museum gallery, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. And
then
that worked, yeah.
And that worked great. And then the classroom, was it just stationary, one video camera? Yeah, so you were more manually drawing the movement. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, you can mix and match and do whatever, but wearable cameras have their advantages, far away have their advantages. Down the road, it would be nice in the IGS, the hope is that this is far down the road, but you drag and drop a video file and that's it. Makes the floor plan, transcribes the movement, makes the conversation. We're not there yet, right? Those jumps would lead to all sorts of other amazing things and other technology, but that's why, she can do it with wearables or stationary from far away. Sometimes it's a heck of a lot easier to transcribe movement from stationary cameras far away. Actually, it's like always, but having both gives you, as you probably know, different perspectives on everything. So, yeah.
There's a question in the chat about consent, especially with multiple people in the space. And I would also add to that, like, even in that small moment you showed from the Bluegrass group, a group already standing in an exhibit can affect whether a group walks up to them. So how do you kind of handle that complexity of, it's not just the group you're focusing on in this space and part of this larger social experience?
Yeah, no, of course, central question. And again, like, to doing any of this work, I mean, that question is so relevant to so much work, and there's so much going on where it's like people, I mean, they approve, you put a sign up and say, you're being video recorded, right? And if you walk through it, you're on video, and that's all folks have to do. And sometimes that is IRB approval. But in all the work I was sharing today was two things. Of course, consent was gotten, and also it was kind of interesting. Some of the original goals were actually to produce a visualization for the visitors that they would leave with. And we always thought that was super interesting. We want to come back to that. But just hitting on Sasha's question, it's super important. And also, if you take this approach and try to work with people rather than kind of viewing it as collect as much data as possible, some really neat things can happen, we think. But yeah, if you're a researcher or a museum, there are ways to work with the IRB to do this in the most protective way, the most meaningful way, and those types of things. So yeah, great, really important question.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, I just saw the Georgia State. Yeah, that's right. She's down there now. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Thank you, Ben, for sharing the phenomenal work. I really agree with a lot of the comments. It's really inspiring. I love the topic, the work you're doing, the way you're doing it, the open source philosophy behind it, and it's stretching multiple fields in different ways. So I have many kind of thoughts and questions, and I'll try to, it's hard to pick one to start, but I just find it, the way you're trying to combine the spatial element, the conversational element, the social element, which are in many studies I see in learning analytics, for example, it's really hard to integrate together. So I see the integration you're doing is really transformative and could lead to new theories of learning and new ways to look at learning. So I wonder whether you can talk a little bit, besides the practical side of designing learning experiences, are there emerging or ongoing work in those areas that can help us conceptualize learning differently whether it's in classrooms or in museum settings?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's so cool. I mean, a couple things when you're talking, I mean, I don't even know, I kind of frame this talk more to a museum studies audience, I think, but I actually have no idea how many folks are on this talk are more learning analytics, but of course, and you are. So in thinking, I could throw on more of a computational hat and talk about this work. And I think that's like also really interesting. I mean, a couple of thoughts just generally to your question. It was really cool to write the software for this, actually. I think the deep qualitative work involved in this, and also the context of museums and the types of data collected and all these things cause the how you write the software to be different, right? So it's kind of a software design perspective, if that makes sense. And I think for learning analytics work, there could be something really interesting there. I think like natural language, NLP, natural language processing, throwing a spatial element on that. I mean, I haven't seen that much work in it. I mean, I'm not immensely knowledgeable, but I think that's like, I had just shown a simple, kind of regular expression like thing working today to search questions, right? Or search talk, right? It's like, it would be very easy to drag and drop different types of NLP into that system, right? And certainly for museum educators, different ways to search talk and highlight conversations, group conversations across different spaces would be really useful, hopefully. So I think some of your question to me leads there. And, geez, in architecture, there's a whole set of methods called spatial syntax. They're super informative. They like literally are an example that impacts how we build spaces. It thinks about movement in a floor plan view, never over time. It does not think about talk, right? So I think another interest for me when I think about computationally here is disciplines like architecture that influence schools and influence museums. Like, they don't look at talk, they don't look at things over time. And if you start doing those things, what happens? So all that to say, I haven't written a lot to learning analytics, I personally, and I think my entry has been like Roberto's work and Marcella Worsley's a little bit. And so I think be really cool to think more with the learning analytics, but yeah.
Thanks, Ben. One area that I love to explore, just looking at how the group were interacting in those videos, in the interactive geography, is to focus on the unit of the family and how to see how the family kind of stretch and move and evolve together. That's because my social network analysis hat, which I'm familiar with, but I love to think more about how to combine that spatial physical element dimension with the social dimension in a computational way. I think that would be super interesting to explore.
Oh yeah, that sounds, I feel like folks on this call too bring a lot of expertise. I mean, the only thing I think would add, but I feel like in the qualitative world, there's like work like Ingold, Meshworks, entanglements. If you're qualitative research, you've heard those things. And then I think in the computational world, like social network analysis, these types of things, ways to look at group behavior. I mean, a hope is, this stuff could bring that together in some way too, would be one thing on my mind. Yeah, super cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just say from the museum perspective, Bodong, that is like 100% what we are thinking about, because the way that a family grow, like you said, expands and contracts, if we think about them as a unit, in there is driven by every member's interest, every member's priorities, their own, and the ways that we have to analyze a visit, both from what does an individual come in with their particular goals, keeping in mind that there are dynamics between parents and children, or in my family, the older and younger child, and who gets to pick what we're going to go spend time with. And so the ways that we could use this to think about the group visit as well as the individual visit. And we always have to go back and forth between those units of analysis as we're looking at the experience.
Super relevant, yeah.
Yeah, everybody is naming past studies that we've done where we're like, could we have used this? Oh, that was 8 years ago. You probably didn't have it ready yet, Ben. Yeah. But I think that turning to museum research for the museum place, knowing that the museum field is poorly represented in the literature, because I am not rewarded for publishing articles. I'm rewarded for many other things. But turning to the actual people who are in museums to think about what are those, again, set it and forget it. We could write an analysis and then it could be a push the button thing in your tool. That would be really exciting, because you're not going to find it necessarily in the published literature. You're going to find it in the gray literature, and you're going to find it in the conversations that we have with each other.
Yeah. That's super helpful. Yeah.
One thing I'm thinking a lot about in terms of use is, as we think about families and individuals moving across a whole exhibition space or a whole museum space, also how do we scale down when you have someone who then spends that long time at, I forgot who the person was in the bluegrass group, or like I'm thinking about maker spaces right now. They stop and they then spend a long time at one of our workstation tables. How can we potentially also use this tool to scale in, and almost like a microscope? Like now we have this moment where there's not a lot of geographical movement, but there's still going to be different types of engagement, and thinking about maybe the objects, the materials in the makerspace as moving, or the tools as moving, and kind of being able to move across those different scales to select moments for that deeper analysis. It seems so great for like exploration and figuring out these things of interest. Yeah, that's just triggering right now.
No, that's super relevant. I mean, I don't know. The only thing in the tool now, you can zoom in on like a second, right? But how cool would it be if there was a whole nother layer that when you zoomed in, like you're saying, it gave you another layer of kind of interactional detail. And so you could imagine layers being added to this tool, but it also, I think it does raise the question. I think when you look at like, the IGS tool is really good for seeing movement and conversation in a particular way, at a certain scale, perhaps. And so just distinguishing the value of each scale and certainly providing ways to go between them, but it may not make sense to, I don't know, maybe you zoom in on a minute in the IGS, click a button, and it takes you to somewhere else, a totally different way to look at interaction in that detail, or you import an image of a transcript you made of that interaction or something. I'm not sure, but it's a super relevant question. Yeah. And that it's not, sorry, sometimes this, of course, this method, like if there's not movement, you might not want to even think about this, right? Like, you know, if you're talking about people sitting, table group in a classroom and there's literally no physical movement beyond the table group, this may not be the most appropriate thing, of course. So, yeah.
And can I ask another question?
Oh, yeah.
This is Alice. So I've worked at the Science Museum with Marjorie and Megan,
cool.
but now I'm at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and I'm remembering that we did a VSA talk, Megan.
Oh, yeah, VSA talk, of course.
Ago,
yeah.
Which feels like a long time. It was probably like 6 months ago, but it feels like a long time ago. Anyways, one thing I was thinking about, well, a couple things. Curious to know if you've done any of this work with participants who self-identify as having a disability, particularly physical disability, or auditory or visual. That's something that I'm trying to help get some more movement around, and thinking the experiences are, I want to make sure I'm capturing visitor experiences in a rich way. So I'm just thinking about using this kind of approach for that. So I'm curious if you had any experience with that population.
I have not in a museum context. It sounds like potentially fascinating. My only angle is we've worked with students to collect their own movement, not in a museum, but across the whole city. And we've had students who have had disabilities, and when they do it versus students who don't, what you see in the movement is really helpful to have conversations about what it means to be disabled and what, those types. So I don't know what that would look like in a museum. It sounds like it could be incredible, potentially. Yeah.
I'm thinking about how I think right now we're using a lot of verbal data. We get feedback on comment cards, and so we're telling the story via our visitor comments. It's hard to read the labels. It's hard to get from here to there. This is challenging for me, but I'm, sometimes it just doesn't get through. And so I'm thinking a visual way to describe their literal journey right through the museum might be an additionally powerful way to tell a story that is, like I keep saying, is like already been
Yeah.
told, but not getting through. So thanks for offering that example of having people do it themselves.
I think a case study of what it's like to move through a museum when you have a disability, just a single person or one group could be really powerful. Like that case in itself could be powerful. If you compare it to like what there probably is going to be enormous differences that would be visible. That sounds like great work to do. Yeah.
Great. Done. No.
Yeah, you do it. Yeah.
Not totally unrelated too. I'm wondering if you've layered on or with your the sort of coding of conversational analysis, added on any emotional codes or whatever you want to call it, feelings, emotions, responses, excitements, if any of your work has done that.
So I didn't show it today, but in the tool now, and it will expand it later, just you can create another type of file called a code file. And just basically, you can create as many codes as you want of whatever you see in videos. Just line them up and create them in a Excel spreadsheet. And you can import them. And then you can highlight only those codes. Or you can color code. Instead of color by people, you can color code it by the codes. And so that's currently provides a way to do this. Longer term, there's way more complex ways to add that in, but there's a simple way to do something like what you said now. Yeah. Yep.
Thanks. There's, I guess, one connection from the museum world. When I got to the Minneapolis Institute of Art, there was a lot of interest in visitor journeys, which is not unlike what Megan and Marjorie and Sarah are talking about, the whole museum study, but how does a visitor move? What is their journey? What are their touch points? And that had a very specific use within visitor experience staff. How are we literally, sorry, no, maybe not literally, how are we serving, how are we best serving our audiences? But it got me thinking to all the other touch points that people have and highs and lows of mood, but also what's available to people throughout the museum. And again, Marjorie and Megan, especially, like thinking back to that very early work that we did right before I left. What's the 4 words you would use to describe in this moment, in this part of the museum versus that part of the museum? But where was I going with that? Just, I think maybe just to offer that from the visitor experience side of things, I think journey mapping might be a good bridge for some of us in the museum world to know that it's not a foreign concept to some of our colleagues across the floor. But that might be how they talk about it.
And I think, Alice, that's really, I think, useful to think about sort of within an exhibit and also across a whole experience. The other thing, I think, especially as you start to go across a whole experience, those, the tactical conversations, where do the conversations of, does anyone need to go to the bathroom? Does anybody, because those matter for your experience with the space. So they're not filler. You don't ignore them the same way that in a classroom, a teacher has to take care of the kids' physical needs before you can worry about the learning. And so what are the ways that visitors put together, okay, we're going to go to this space and then we're going to go to this space. And then the 5-year-old really wants to go see the dinosaurs, so we'll go over there. You could start to use codes, I think, for sort of turn taking, or just the ways that those tactical decisions, honestly, the role that the tactical decisions allow you to also have those emotional moments, those learning moments, those engagement moments. We don't put the tactical decisions in the mission statement, but they allow the mission to happen.
Yeah.
I also wonder about, there was a really wonderful paper quite a few years ago now, Thianu Masori, using GPS in the London Zoo. And she took visitor surveys about reasons why they came to the museum and saw differences in how they used that whole zoo space based off of if they were there for primarily like educational reasons or like, I want to spend time with my family reasons. I wonder if there's some of these other layers we can put on as you start making comparisons across families engaging in the same museum or the same exhibit, how their movement changes. There's all sorts of variables, like the ages of children that are in the group is probably a huge one. Those reasons for visiting, how often they've come to the museum in the past, Even some things like, it would be really interesting to, as part of a more participatory approach, asking those specific visitors, like, what was your favorite thing? What are you really remembering about your visit? And then focusing in on those moments. How are those different from the other things that aren't sticking out in their mind?
That's interesting. Oh yeah, and repeated visits, like, yeah, that's really interesting. Jeez.
Ben, to kind of, I'm going to kind of zoom out a little bit, and just thinking about the history of, well, I'm not going to zoom out like so much, but the history of transcripts is so fascinating. There was just like, most of academic work would just like write down the words that people said, right? Like just, and in like orthographic, like what is the proper spelling of the word, right? And then conversation analysis, Gail Jefferson starts adding in prosody and word emphasis and timing. And you can, there's been 40 years, 50 years of research on conversation analysis that has uncovered patterns in how we take turns and how we establish authority and how you get someone to answer a question in a particular way. But you could have never done that if you didn't represent those features of talk. And I think it was probably quite disorienting for people at first to read transcripts like that. Now, if you're in the discourse analysis community and you see it, it's easy. But when I look at your transcripts, I have like I feel like it's at a similar like inflection point where, okay, we all know that our whole bodies are moving around a lot. It's no surprise that we have so much interest from museum folks here, because museums are such wonderful spaces where you give people freedom of movement. The classrooms also, of course, have it to an extent. And I'm just thinking, you know, we're at the beginning of understanding how to pair talk with representations of movement. And I just think I also am so fascinated that we're already asking for more in here. You know, Alice is mentioning emotion. There's gesture. There's like the objects that you're touching, right? If you think about that cardboard city, there's all the materials you're interacting with. And I'm just wondering if we can bridge all of those. Are we really studying learning in quite a different way, in the same way that you're studying learning in a different way once you start paying attention to prosody and emphasis and whatnot? And do you sort of anticipate that the patterns we'll notice and the kind of like, you know, things we can observe about how people learn will just like look very different as this work matures and as folks start using these tools?
Oh man, so much to talk there. I mean, if I was to, first, a few things you made me think, like, I mean, any transcript is good for some things and terrible for other things, whether it's made in Word, you know, if you code it up in whatever type of way, if it's interactive, you know, if it's big data, small data, whatever, you can frame a transcript in lots of ways, but they're really selective and they're good for some things and not good for other things. It is cool when you have interactive stuff and you can bring in multiple conventions. That's pretty different and pretty neat. I think reading the interaction geography stuff, I mean, I really tried today. It's really hard to, it's a different way to look. and a lot of the work is trying to communicate that. And one of the hardest things is like, actually, we have a way to read timelines that we've all been taught in school, like how to read a graph. And it really conflicts sometimes with what this is trying to do. And that's okay. It's just like, there's a real challenge with this. A lot of the talks I gave in today, I feel like I scratch the surface. I try to give enough so folks can be like, oh, I kind of get that. That's interesting. And then if, you know, they can go on their own and look, but I feel like I never get deeper into the conventions, and I think there's a lot more there. And then I think a third thing you made me think is like the mediums we use to make transcripts. I mean, in qualitative work, even multimodal transcripts, I would argue are like, it's like Word and PowerPoint. And it's not like, it's not like everyone wants to make them in Word and PowerPoint. It gets more complicated than that. It's not like everyone's doing that, but like generally the mediums used are pretty weak. So I think it's the wrong word. They're of a certain type. They're good for some things, bad for others. The medium here is a programming language, a set of programming languages and particular ones, and there's strengths and weaknesses there. But I think that's like totally unexplored. So I know for me, a lot of my recent writing and thinking has been a little bit about, you know, bringing kind of computation and visualization languages into some of these qualitative worlds. And that's actually really challenging, because I think computer science for a qualitative researcher a lot of times can be like, I don't want, that's, there's issues with that when you try to bring those worlds together, and learning analytics does it really well sometimes, that, Bodo knows, and it's a real challenge. But the last thing I'd say is like the idea that like visitors learn, that visitors are curators has been like, so in education, we have like acquisition metaphors of learning. We have participation metaphors of learning. We have these metaphors. Those two are the huge ones. And certainly with like, critical approaches, more recent political turns in learning sciences and other types of things, there's kind of a set of things developing there. I mean, this idea that learning as curation for me has been something through this work that you're able to see. So I think there's something there in museums. It's like, if we think of a visitor or a family as curating through their movement and conversation, and even their social media activity, if you imagine coding their social media use through some of the representations I showed today, which is some of the things I've been doing, that comes out. So, but I suppose you also raise like, I don't know, you look at all this detail, but there's real value in some of the older approaches. So perhaps that's like, I mean, there's value in the ways that we've looked at learning in the past. So I don't ever think this method or any others, it's not about replacing those, certainly. And being too integrative is kind of useless sometimes, perhaps, I don't know. So, yeah. Oh, that's cool. Well, cool. Yeah.
Can I ask the question about learning metaphors is a new concept to me. Is that something that you could just say like one more sentence about, or point me in the right direction?
Oh, you should totally talk to David and Megan too. But there's a great paper from Anna Safard on two metaphors and the dangers of choosing one. It's great. It's very easy read, and it lays out different metaphors. And the nice thing is it's not about one being better than the other, but they're rooted in different ways to look at learning. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
We are just about out of time, and I want to make sure that we can wrap up and respect Ben's time as well. Ben, this was so expansive for us all, as you can tell.
That's great for me. Thanks for
thank you so much to SMM colleagues. This was a blast to jointly host a talk like this. Let's consider more opportunities down the road. And I know Ben is you've shared with me, these are open source tools, right? The hope is that we can use them. So I'm going to say reach out to Ben, and I know he'll be interested in collaborating with you. Also, just a very quick plug. Next Tuesday in this same Learning Informatics Lab series, we have a talk on epistemic network analysis by David Schaefer. If that is of interest to you, reach out to Megan or to me or to Bodong, and we can share that info with you. It'll be Tuesday morning. Ben, thank you so much. Everyone, have wonderful weekends, and take care.
You too, David. All right. Thanks, everybody. See everyone.